In the heart of a city known for wealth and luxury, there lived a billionaire whose name echoed in every boardroom, every high-end restaurant, and every elite social gathering. From the outside, he seemed like the perfect image of success, perfectly tailored suits, sleek sports cars, private jets, and a mansion that looked more like a palace than a home. People often whispered about him, some with admiration, others with a hint of fear, because his power was not just financial, it extended into influence, connections, and a presence that could make people nervous with just a glance. He lived surrounded by opulence. His house was a fortress of marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and priceless art. Every room told a story of extravagance, rooms filled with rare antiques, private libraries stacked with books no one had time to read, and hallways adorned with gold-trimmed mirrors. Outside, his gardens stretched for acres, with fountains, sculptures, and pools that reflected the sunlight like liquid diamonds. In a city where most people could only dream of such wealth, he was a living legend, a symbol of extreme success, and the embodiment of the idea that money could buy anything, even respect, love, or loyalty. Yet beneath the glittering surface, there was a different side of his world, a side few ever saw. He was known to be unpredictable and often impatient. People who worked for him sometimes described him as charming one moment and terrifying the next. His words could cut sharper than knives, and his moods could swing like storms. Despite all his wealth, there was a restlessness in him, a constant hunger for more power, more control, and more people under his influence. It was as if money alone was not enough, he needed to feel untouchable, like the world itself bowed before him. He kept a staff to manage every detail of his life, from chefs who prepared meals with precision, to drivers who navigated traffic as if it were a battlefield, to maids who polished his floors and folded his clothes. Among these employees, there was one who worked quietly, efficiently, never asking for attention, never demanding praise. Her presence was like a shadow, always there but easily overlooked. For him, she was just another part of his carefully managed household, someone whose life he believed he could control entirely. Visitors who entered his mansion often marveled at the grandeur. They spoke of the glimmering chandeliers, the exotic flowers that seemed to bloom year-round, and the walls lined with artwork that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Yet, behind the walls of this fairy tale home, the billionaire's world was a mix of isolation and dominance. He didn't trust easily, and every relationship seemed measured against a standard of usefulness or loyalty. Friendships were rare, laughter was often absent, and genuine emotion was hard to find. Everything revolved around his status, his image, and his belief that he was untouchable. Despite the lavish lifestyle, there was an air of tension in his world. Employees moved carefully, always aware that a single mistake could trigger his wrath. Servants whispered about his moods, while friends and business partners tread lightly, fearing they might fall from favor. Even in public, where he smiled and charmed the press, there was an edge to him, a subtle reminder that power came with its price, and crossing him could be dangerous. This world of wealth, control, and fear set the stage for the events to come. The billionaire believed that he ruled not just his home, but the lives of those around him. Every detail was managed according to his wishes, every action observed and measured. Yet, in this world where he felt omnipotent, there was one element he underestimated, the unpredictability of life and the courage of those he considered beneath him. The grandeur of his palace and the perfection of his life could not protect him from the consequences of his own actions, and it was this blind spot that would soon lead to a shocking, unforgettable moment. In his world, money could buy luxury, influence, and respect, but it could not buy wisdom, empathy, or the certainty that everything would always go according to plan. And as he moved through his mansion, inspecting every detail and expecting obedience from everyone around him, little did he know that his sense of absolute control was about to be challenged in the most dramatic way imaginable. Amid the glittering world of the billionaire, there was one person whose life could not have been more different. She was a maid, quiet and unassuming, with no title, no fortune, and no influence. Yet beneath her modest exterior, there was a resilience and strength that few could imagine. She had grown up in a small town, a place where dreams were limited and every day was a struggle. Life had taught her early on that survival depended on hard work, patience, and the ability to endure. Her family had struggled to make ends meet, and from a young age, she had understood that opportunities were rare. Education had been a privilege, not a guarantee, and she had spent long hours helping her parents, running errands, and learning to adapt to challenges that seemed endless. Despite hardships, she had a spark, a determination that kept her going even when the world seemed against her. She dreamed quietly, hoping for a life that was safe, stable, and perhaps, one day, a little brighter. When she came to work in the billionaire's mansion, it was like stepping into a different universe. The marble floors gleamed under her careful hands, the chandeliers reflected in her eyes, and the garden seemed to stretch endlessly beyond her imagination. Every corner of the house was a reminder of wealth she had never known. At first, the opulence was almost overwhelming. She had never seen so many rooms, so many luxuries, and yet, in all this grandeur, she felt invisible. To the billionaire, she was just another employee, a quiet shadow that moved around the house without drawing attention. Despite the intimidating atmosphere, she carried herself with dignity. She knew her role, understood her responsibilities, and performed every task with care. From polishing the silver to cleaning the floors, arranging the rooms, and even preparing meals, she never complained. Her life had taught her that obedience and silence could be powerful tools, and she used them skillfully. She observed quietly, learning the patterns of the household, the moods of the billionaire, and the hidden tensions that lingered beneath polite smiles. Yet, she was not completely powerless. Her intelligence and intuition gave her subtle influence. She understood when to speak, when to remain silent, and when small gestures could make a difference. Even in a house ruled by fear and extravagance, she found small ways to assert her presence, whether by quietly correcting a mistake, anticipating needs before they were expressed, or showing unexpected kindness to others around her. Her strength was not in wealth or status, it was in her ability to endure, adapt, and survive. The billionaire, confident in his control, rarely considered her as more than a servant. He underestimated her, as he did many around him, believing that her life, her choices, and her actions were entirely at his discretion. He failed to notice the quiet intelligence in her eyes, the careful observation in her movements, or the courage that simmered just beneath the surface. He saw only obedience, loyalty, and convenience, not realizing that the very traits he took for granted would soon challenge everything he thought he controlled. Her world inside the mansion was a delicate balance. She had to navigate not just the physical tasks of her work, but the psychological games of a household where power and fear were constant companions. Every glance, every word, and every action was measured against the unpredictable temperament of the billionaire. Mistakes were not just corrected, they were noticed, remembered, and sometimes punished. Yet she moved through her duties with grace, never allowing fear to cloud her judgment or slow her hands. Outside the mansion, her life remained grounded in reality. She had friends, family, and memories of a life much simpler, yet much freer. These contrasts, between the luxury she served and the simplicity she missed, shaped her, giving her both humility and quiet strength. She knew that in a world of extremes, courage could appear in the smallest acts, and resilience could be found in silence. Every day, she carried herself with quiet dignity, proving that even in the shadow of immense power, a person's true strength was not measured by wealth, but by character, intelligence, and heart. Little did she know that her resilience, courage, and careful observation would soon be tested in ways no one could predict. The billionaire's arrogance and the illusions of control that surrounded him were about to collide with her quiet strength, setting the stage for a moment that would shock everyone, revealing that power and fear, no matter how great, could never fully contain the human spirit. Life in the mansion, which had once seemed like a world apart from reality, was beginning to show cracks. The billionaire, confident in his control over everything, had always believed that obedience could replace respect, and fear could replace loyalty. Yet, as days passed, small incidents started to test the delicate balance of his household. The maid, who had so far moved silently through her duties, was beginning to attract attention, not because she was trying to, but because her quiet confidence and careful intelligence made her impossible to ignore. At first, the signs were subtle. A tray of drinks perfectly arranged, a room that seemed tidier than it should be, a small correction made to an error the billionaire didn't even know existed. To him, these were small inconveniences or surprises, easily dismissed. But over time, he began to notice a pattern. She was observant, patient, and unafraid to act in ways that were both precise and bold, while still appearing obedient. It was a combination that unnerved him more than he wanted to admit. The tension grew slowly, almost imperceptibly, like a storm forming on the horizon. The billionaire's moods were volatile, swinging between charm and cruelty in a heartbeat. One moment, he could laugh over a dinner, complimenting his guests on the perfect service, and the next, he could rage over a minor mistake, shouting words that left the staff trembling. The maid, however, had learned to navigate this unpredictability. She moved carefully, anticipating his whims, yet she refused to let fear dominate her entirely. Every careful action she took was both survival and subtle defiance. Some of the staff began whispering about her in hushed tones. They noticed the way she never flinched when he scolded her, the way she corrected errors before he even noticed them, and the way she seemed almost untouchable despite his attempts to assert dominance. To them, it was both inspiring and dangerous, because the billionaire did not tolerate challenges to his authority, and the smallest misstep could spark his anger. The billionaire, for his part, was becoming increasingly impatient. He prided himself on controlling every detail, every person, and every corner of his mansion. The idea that someone could quietly, almost invisibly, operate with a sense of independence unsettled him. He began testing her, assigning tasks that seemed impossible, expecting mistakes, hoping for failure. He wanted to remind her, and anyone watching, that he was untouchable, that no one could outsmart him in his carefully constructed world. Yet the maid continued to navigate these challenges with a quiet resilience that frustrated him more than he could express. Her calm, unflappable demeanor became a silent challenge, a mirror showing him that control is never absolute. Small tensions began to rise into confrontations, not loud, dramatic clashes, but subtle, charged exchanges that carried more weight than anyone in the mansion realized. Each reprimand, each correction, each fleeting moment of defiance added to a growing pressure that neither the billionaire nor the maid fully understood yet. Meanwhile, the air in the mansion was changing. Staff members moved more carefully, aware that the balance was shifting. The billionaire's temper was sharper, his mood swings longer, and his impatience with anyone who dared to challenge him, even in small ways, was growing. And yet, no matter how hard he tried, the maid remained composed. She did not openly defy him, but she also refused to be cowed, and the subtle tension between them became palpable, a quiet war of wills that simmered beneath the surface of everyday life. This tension set the stage for something far more dramatic. The billionaire's arrogance, his belief that fear and wealth could control everything, was blinding him to the truth. There were limits to his power. The maid's courage and intelligence, her quiet resilience, were building into a force that neither he nor anyone else in the mansion could fully contain. Each day of rising tension, each small challenge, and each subtle defiance was a thread in a rope that would soon pull them both toward a shocking confrontation. The mansion, with its marble floors and glittering chandeliers, seemed almost to hold its breath. Behind the walls of wealth and power, two very different worlds were colliding, the billionaire's world of absolute control, and the maid's world of quiet strength. Neither could fully dominate the other, and the stage was being set for a moment that would leave everyone in the household shocked, unprepared, and forever changed. The tension that had been simmering in the mansion finally reached a breaking point. The billionaire, already irritated by what he perceived as the maid's subtle challenges, decided to take control in a way that was shocking even by his standards. In his mind, fear had always been the ultimate tool, fear of him, fear of his power, fear of the consequences of defying him. And now, he believed, it was time to remind her exactly who ruled the house. It began as a normal day in the mansion. The sun reflected off the crystal chandeliers, painting golden light across the marble floors. Staff moved quietly, aware that something in the air had shifted, sensing the storm that was about to break. The maid, as usual, carried out her duties with quiet precision, arranging silverware, dusting surfaces, and ensuring that every corner of the house was immaculate. She was careful, as always, yet she could not anticipate the depths of the billionaire's anger, or the dark plan that had begun forming in his mind. The billionaire appeared suddenly, his face flushed, his temper already raw. Words that should have been casual remarks turned sharp, cutting like knives through the air. He accused her of small mistakes, minor oversights, things that were insignificant to anyone else but, in his eyes, were evidence of disobedience. The maid remained calm, answering respectfully, apologizing for errors she hadn't even made, trying to defuse the rising tension. But it was too late. The billionaire's mind was made up, and the spark of cruelty in him had been ignited. He led her to the edge of his private estate, to the river that ran along the back of his property, a river known for its crocodiles, a dark, twisting waterway that glimmered under the sun but hid danger beneath its surface. He spoke harshly, his voice sharp with impatience and anger, demanding explanations for imagined slights. The maid answered with caution, careful with her words, hoping to appease him, to avoid the consequences of his growing rage. But the billionaire's sense of absolute control had reached a dangerous extreme. And then it happened. In a moment of unthinkable arrogance, he pushed her toward the river, expecting fear to consume her, expecting the danger beneath the water to finish what he had started. Time seemed to slow as she stumbled, her hands reaching out instinctively, her heart pounding with terror. The crocodiles, lurking silently beneath the surface, were waiting for any sign of weakness, and the billionaire stood there, watching, certain that his plan would succeed. But the maid was not as helpless as he imagined. Her instincts, sharpened by years of survival, took over. She splashed into the water with unexpected agility, kicking and struggling to stay afloat. Panic surged through her, but so did determination. She refused to surrender, refusing to allow his cruelty to define her fate. Every stroke, every movement was fueled by a mix of fear, adrenaline, and a will to survive that the billionaire could not comprehend. From the shore, the billionaire's expression began to change. Confidence gave way to disbelief, and then to panic. He had expected terror, submission, a quiet surrender, but what he saw was courage, resilience, and determination. The water, which he had thought would be her end, became the stage for his own unraveling. And in that moment, as the maid struggled against the currents, he realized that control was an illusion, that power was not absolute, and that the consequences of cruelty could be immediate and unpredictable. The moment stretched, unbearable and tense, the mansion and the river bearing silent witness. Every movement, every breath, every splash carried weight. The billionaire's arrogance, which had always defined him, was colliding with reality. He had underestimated her, underestimated life itself, and the illusion of control he had built around himself was beginning to crumble. By the riverbank, it was clear that this was no ordinary confrontation. The fear, the danger, the raw fight for survival, all converged in a single, terrifying moment. And in that instant, the roles began to shift. The billionaire, who had believed himself untouchable, was about to discover the power of resilience, the force of courage, and the truth that even in the most controlled environments, life could surprise, shock, and humble anyone, no matter how wealthy or powerful they believed themselves to be. The river was alive in a way that was both beautiful and terrifying. Sunlight danced on the surface, creating sparkling patterns, but beneath, the dark, murky water concealed predators that moved silently, waiting. For most people, it was just a river. For the maid, in that moment, it had become a battlefield, a place where survival was no longer optional. She fought to keep her head above the water, her lungs burning, her heart hammering, knowing that one mistake could be fatal. The crocodiles, lurking beneath the rippling surface, sensed every disturbance. Their eyes, almost invisible above the waterline, followed her movements. The maid knew instinctively that panic could be more deadly than the creatures themselves. Every splash, every frantic movement, had to be calculated. She had never faced anything like this before, and yet her life depended on mastering it. Every muscle, every thought, every heartbeat was focused on one goal, staying alive. Her mind raced as she scanned the river for the safest path. There were submerged branches, rocks, and eddies that could either aid her escape or drag her under. She clung to anything that gave her support, kicking with determination, using her hands to push herself forward. Her survival instincts, honed by years of hardship, now guided her with a precision she didn't even know she had. This was no longer about obedience, no longer about fear of a billionaire, it was about life itself, pure and unfiltered. From the shore, the billionaire watched, his expression a mixture of disbelief and horror. The moment he had expected to cement his control had instead become a scene of defiance. He had thought the river would end her, that the crocodiles would teach her a lesson, that fear would bend her will. Instead, he saw a force of nature in human form, a woman refusing to die, refusing to surrender, refusing to be defeated. The arrogance that had always defined him began to crumble with every stroke she made, every gasp she drew, every frantic movement that kept her alive. The maid's arms ached, her legs trembled, and her body screamed for rest, but she ignored it. She could not stop. The river was unforgiving, offering no second chances. Her mind became laser-focused, thinking only of immediate survival, dodge the current, avoid the shadows beneath the surface, and find solid ground. Each second felt like an eternity. Each breath taken was a victory. Fear coursed through her veins, but determination pushed it aside. Time seemed to stretch indefinitely as the river tested her, its murky depths threatening to pull her down at any moment. She remembered every lesson life had taught her, how to endure, how to persevere, how to use courage as armor. The pain in her muscles, the sting of water in her eyes, the weight of exhaustion, all of it became fuel for her willpower. She moved forward inch by inch, never daring to look back, never giving up hope. Meanwhile, the billionaire's panic grew. He had never expected resistance like this, had never imagined that one person could survive something he thought was inevitable. His fear was not just for her safety but for the illusion of his own power. The river had exposed a truth he had long ignored: control was fragile, arrogance could blind, and life, in its raw unpredictability, could humble even the most untouchable man. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the maid's hands brushed against a submerged branch near the riverbank. Clinging to it with desperate strength, she pulled herself closer to safety. Every movement was a battle against exhaustion, but she refused to surrender. Step by step, she edged toward solid ground, feeling the river's current fight her at every turn. And in that moment, the river, which had seemed like an instrument of death, became a witness to her resilience, courage, and unyielding spirit. As she finally reached the riverbank, dripping and exhausted but alive, a silence fell over the scene. The crocodiles, sensing her survival, disappeared beneath the water, and the billionaire, still on the shore, could only stare, realizing that his world of control and fear had been shattered. The river had tested both of them, revealing not just the limits of human arrogance, but the extraordinary strength of someone who refused to give up. The river had quieted, its ripples slowly settling after the struggle, but the mansion grounds were far from calm. The billionaire stood on the bank, drenched in a mix of sweat and disbelief, unable to comprehend what had just happened. He had expected fear, submission, and silence. Instead, he had witnessed courage, determination, and defiance, the very things he thought his wealth and power could suppress. For the first time in years, he felt powerless, stripped of the control he had always taken for granted. His mind raced, panic flooding every thought. The reality of the situation hit him like a lightning strike. The maid, the person he had believed was insignificant, was alive. Alive despite his plan, alive despite the crocodiles, alive despite his arrogance. The billionaire's heart pounded, and a cold, sinking fear settled in his stomach. The illusion of dominance that had guided his every action was unraveling before his eyes. His wealth, his influence, and his carefully constructed image of invincibility suddenly seemed meaningless. He had always thought of himself as untouchable, a man above consequences, a figure whose power could bend the world to his will. But the river, the crocodiles, and the maid's survival proved him wrong. His mind darted from one desperate thought to another. Could he save face? Could he somehow undo what had just happened? Could he even explain this failure to those who watched him in awe and fear? Every option he imagined only deepened his panic, because he realized that this time, there was no escaping reality. The billionaire began to shout, not with anger, but with disbelief and fear. He called her name, his voice trembling as he begged her to come closer, to show some mercy, to acknowledge him. But the maid, exhausted, dripping, and still standing strong on the riverbank, looked at him with a mixture of caution and defiance. She had survived not because of him, but in spite of him. Every plea he made, every desperate gesture, reminded her of how close she had come to death, and how little control he truly had. His arrogance, which had always been his shield, now became his vulnerability. Staff who had been watching from the mansion were frozen, unable to believe the turn of events. Whispers spread like wildfire. The billionaire, feared and untouchable for years, was now begging, his pride shattered by the courage of a single maid. The imbalance of power that had defined the mansion was reversed in an instant, exposing the fragility of fear and wealth when faced with raw human will. The river had done more than test the maid, it had revealed the billionaire's own weaknesses. He stumbled closer to the edge, his voice rising with a mix of pleading and confusion. Each word he spoke, each desperate motion he made, was a testament to the irony of the situation. He had intended to punish, to teach a lesson, and to assert dominance, but instead, he became the one humiliated, the one vulnerable, the one begging for something he could no longer control. The maid, despite exhaustion, took a careful step back, her body tense and alert. She knew the danger was not fully over. The billionaire's desperation could still lead to unpredictable actions, yet she also understood her own power in this moment. Survival had not just been about avoiding death in the river, it had been about proving, to herself and to him, that courage, determination, and intelligence could overcome arrogance and cruelty. For the billionaire, every second was a lesson in humility. The wealth, the opulence, the fame, and the carefully constructed authority he had relied on crumbled under the weight of reality. He realized, in a shock that went far deeper than any reprimand or failed plan, that life had a force of its own, indifferent to his schemes, indifferent to his ego, and unafraid to upend his sense of invincibility. The mansion, which had once echoed with the sounds of his control, now seemed quieter, almost watchful, as if the walls themselves were judging him. For the first time, he understood the truth: power is temporary, arrogance is fragile, and courage can appear in the most unexpected forms. And in that moment, drenched, humbled, and shaken to his core, the billionaire began to realize that the world he had thought he controlled was far bigger and far more unpredictable than he had ever imagined. The mansion, once a place of fear and control, had changed in an instant. The river, which had tested the maid's courage and resilience, now seemed to settle into a quiet, almost solemn calm, as if acknowledging the battle that had taken place. On the bank, the billionaire stood drenched, humbled, and shaken. He had entered the day with arrogance, expecting absolute obedience, and left it facing the consequences of his own cruelty. He realized, painfully, that wealth and power could not always bend reality to his will. The maid, exhausted but alive, stepped carefully onto solid ground. Every movement was deliberate, every breath measured, as she reclaimed her space in the world she had nearly lost. Her eyes reflected both fatigue and triumph, a combination of relief and unshakable strength. In that moment, she was no longer just a maid in a mansion, she was a survivor, a figure whose courage had toppled the illusions of power that had defined the billionaire's life. Word of the incident spread quickly. The household staff, who had been tense with fear for weeks, began to whisper in awe about what had happened. Rumors reached friends, neighbors, and eventually the press. The story of the billionaire's arrogance, the maid's bravery, and the river's unexpected role in leveling the scales became a sensation. Social media exploded with discussions, debates, and viral posts. People from all walks of life were captivated by the narrative of wealth and power being challenged by courage and resilience. Meanwhile, the billionaire faced his own private reckoning. The incident exposed his temper, his sense of entitlement, and his underestimation of those around him. Friends and business partners began to reconsider their relationships with him. Staff members who had once obeyed out of fear now looked at him differently, aware that his authority had limits. His reputation, carefully built over decades, had been tarnished by a single, dramatic event that the world would not soon forget. The maid, despite the trauma she had endured, found herself receiving support and admiration. People recognized not only her survival but also her composure and intelligence in navigating an impossible situation. She became a symbol, a quiet reminder that bravery often appears in unexpected forms, and that courage can turn the tables even against overwhelming odds. Her life had changed, not because she sought attention, but because she had faced danger and refused to yield. Legal authorities eventually became involved. The billionaire's actions, reckless and dangerous, could not go unchecked. Investigations were launched, and the world watched as the story unfolded in real time. While some tried to defend him, claiming it was a moment of impulsive anger, the truth was undeniable. He had attempted to use fear and violence to control someone weaker, and he had failed. The consequences, both legal and social, began to take shape, reinforcing the lesson that even immense wealth cannot erase accountability. In the mansion itself, life began to adjust, though it was never quite the same. The opulence remained, the marble floors, glittering chandeliers, and sprawling gardens, but the atmosphere had shifted. The aura of absolute power had been replaced with a sense of respect for the resilience that had challenged it. Staff members moved with a quiet confidence, aware that courage and intelligence were forces even the wealthiest could not dominate. The billionaire, now forced to confront his own limitations, learned an unforgettable lesson. Arrogance and cruelty, no matter how carefully masked by wealth, cannot protect a person from reality. Humility, reflection, and accountability became unavoidable truths. He had been reminded that control is fragile, that fear is temporary, and that life has a way of humbling even the most powerful when arrogance blinds judgment. And as the sun set over the mansion, reflecting off the river that had been both a weapon and a witness, the story reached its resolution. The maid had survived, the billionaire had been humbled, and the household, though still grand, carried the weight of a lesson that would not be forgotten. Courage had triumphed over arrogance, resilience had outlasted cruelty, and life had proven, once again, that even in the face of unimaginable power, the human spirit is capable of extraordinary strength. The mansion, once a symbol of untouchable wealth and control, had settled into a quiet stillness. But beneath the surface, the lessons of that day lingered like a shadow that could not be ignored. The events by the Crocodile River were more than a shocking incident, they had become a mirror, reflecting truths about power, courage, and the unpredictable nature of life. In the end, both the billionaire and the maid had been transformed, though in profoundly different ways. For the maid, the experience was both terrifying and empowering. She had faced a moment that could have ended her life in an instant, yet she survived through courage, quick thinking, and determination. It was a victory not just of survival, but of human resilience, showing that even in the face of extreme danger, ordinary people are capable of extraordinary strength. Her life had changed in ways she could not yet fully understand. She had earned respect, not just from the household staff, but from anyone who heard her story, a reminder that bravery often comes from those least expected to wield it. The billionaire, on the other hand, faced a harsher, more painful reflection. For years, he had believed that wealth, fear, and influence could bend the world to his will. He had assumed that his power made him untouchable, that everyone around him existed to serve his desires. But the river had shattered that illusion. In a matter of minutes, his arrogance had been stripped away, replaced by fear, desperation, and the bitter taste of humility. He had been forced to confront a truth he had long avoided: control is fragile, power is temporary, and cruelty always carries consequences. As he sat alone in the mansion later that evening, the silence felt heavier than any luxury he had ever known. The grandeur of the house, the marble floors, the chandeliers, the sprawling gardens, no longer mattered. He could feel the emptiness that wealth could never fill, the gap between what he had and what he had failed to possess, empathy, respect, and true understanding of those around him. The day had become a reckoning, a lesson etched into his memory in a way that no money, no status, and no influence could erase. The household itself had shifted. The staff moved with a newfound confidence, aware that courage and intelligence could triumph over fear. The dynamic that had once been dictated entirely by power was now tempered by respect. The mansion, while still a place of wealth, carried a different atmosphere, one where arrogance was no longer absolute, and humility was quietly recognized. The river, once a mere natural feature, had become a symbol of balance, a reminder that life cannot always be controlled, and that even the strongest can be humbled. The story spread far beyond the mansion. Social media, news outlets, and conversations everywhere discussed the improbable sequence of events, the billionaire's arrogance, the maid's bravery, and the unexpected twist of fate that leveled the playing field. People reflected on the lessons embedded in the narrative. Courage can appear in unlikely forms, power can blind even the most confident, and the human spirit is capable of rising above extreme challenges. The river, silent witness to the drama, became a symbol of the unpredictability of life and the strength that lies within ordinary people. For the billionaire, the humbling experience prompted introspection. He began to see that wealth alone could not command loyalty, that fear could never replace genuine respect, and that arrogance could only lead to isolation. He had been reminded that life has its own rules, that consequences exist even for those who believe themselves above them, and that true power comes not from domination, but from wisdom, empathy, and humility. For the maid, life carried a quiet dignity. She had survived, yes, but she had also been proven strong, clever, and unyielding. The events were a testament to human resilience and courage, the knowledge that even when circumstances seem insurmountable, determination and bravery can alter the course of fate. Her story became a beacon, inspiring those who faced fear, injustice, or overwhelming odds in their own lives. In the end, the Crocodile River was more than a physical place, it was a test, a teacher, and a reminder. It showed that life can humble even the powerful, that courage can rise from the meekest, and that every choice carries consequences. Both the billionaire and the maid left that day changed, one humbled and reflective, the other empowered and unbroken. And for anyone who heard the story, the lesson was clear: strength is not measured by wealth, power, or status, but by courage, resilience, and the ability to face life's dangers without surrender.